If you are pregnant or you've recently had a baby, this podcast is for you. I am your host, Kath Bequee, a physiotherapist working in women's health and mum of three. Inside my online program, Fitness Mama, I just love helping support women to care for their bodies during pregnancy, prepare their bodies for birth, and support their after-birth recovery, helping them feel confident and strong inside out during this important stage of their lives. In this podcast, join me each week as we dive into all things pregnancy care, childbirth, and postnatal recovery, helping you through every step of the journey. It is absolutely possible to feel amazing and confident in our bodies during this motherhood journey, and I want that for you. Come and say hi to me on Instagram @fitnessmama, and let's dive into today's episode. Hello and welcome back to the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. So today's episode is fantastic if you've had your baby or perhaps you're about to have a baby and your baby is approaching the age where you're starting to think about starting solids. So I chat with Kelly today, who is a nutritionist working across the pregnancy, postpartum and paediatric space. And after suffering perinatal anxiety, miscarriage and postpartum depletion along her journey to motherhood, Kelly felt compelled to help others have a better experience. Today with Kelly, we discuss starting solids, when to start, how to know it's the right time to start. We discuss introducing the right foods. We discuss how to prepare different types of foods. We talk about important nutrients to include, making the meal times a positive experience. We discuss the feeding environment and when to seek help. This podcast episode is everything I wish I had for the birth of my first baby 12 years ago. Kelly is a wealth of knowledge and I trust you're going to love today's episode. Before I do dive into this episode today with Kelly, I just want to say thank you so much for the ratings and reviews that this podcast has received over the years. It really is probably one of the most important ways to help this podcast reach more people. What with the podcast algorithm that's out there. Thank you so much for sharing, rating and reviewing. And if you just want to head to your podcast app, whether or not it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and if you would like to give this podcast a rating and review, that would be so appreciated. And at the end of the day, if we can just help one more pregnant or postnatal mama have a wonderful motherhood experience, then how amazing is that? So thank you to you all. Right, let's dive into today's episode with Kelly, all about starting solids. Kelly, thank you so much for joining me today on the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. It's a really fun topic today. Well, fun and daunting probably for parents. It's fun for me in hindsight, but I remember when I had new babies, starting solids is a whole new ball game. So that's what we're chatting today. So thank you so much for coming on to talk all about starting solids, when to start. We're going to be asking, when's the right time to start, how to start. So amazing. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks for having me here. And yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from. I remember when I had my first daughter, the same. It was a minefield for me. I was so nervous about, what foods to introduce, whether she was going to have an allergic reaction, whether she was choking. It was terrifying. So anything we can do to help parents relax a little bit and enjoy the journey rather than feel the anxiety and the nervousness, it's only going to benefit them and their little ones.
And isn't parenthood funny? Like, I feel that I just sort of got my head around having a baby, I've had them for a few months, getting everything sorted with the, breastfeeding and the sleeping. And finally, when you think you've got it all sorted, or perhaps you don't think you've got it sorted, but then bang, let's just start feeding them solids. And the gagging, it's still with my third baby, that gag reflex. I was just like, oh my God, can't wait for this to be over.
Yeah.
Okay.
Totally. And the mess.
And the mess and the gag. Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's start from the start. So actually, first question, Kelly, how did you get into this area?
Yeah, so I studied nutrition a very long time ago and actually ended up working most of my career in marketing. And it wasn't until I had my daughter that I went through the whole pregnancy experience myself, and like a lot of women faced a lot of symptoms that I wasn't expecting, and then struggled through postpartum in terms of nutrient depletion, trying to figure out how to feed my baby, the anxiety of worrying about my baby, and then the whole journey of starting solids. And I thought I wasn't equipped with the information that I should have been equipped with. And I didn't feel that there was enough given to women proactively. And I thought people can have a much better experience than this. And so that was kind of what set me back on my path back into nutrition again, and started my business, Feeding the Bump, which focuses on preconception, pregnancy, postpartum, and then infant nutrition to help women mainly feel better equipped and more confident in their journey, and also help them grow healthier, happier babies.
Amazing. So let's start then with the starting solids. First up, I'd love to know when, because I know there's some conflicting advice, and I know even between my first and second baby, suddenly the guidelines changed. So when to start? What are the latest guidelines, and how do you know it's the right time to start solids with your baby?
Yeah. So it's recommended by the National Health and Medical Research Council, which is kind of the governing or scientific body in Australia that puts out all the food-based recommendations like the Australian Dietary Guidelines and infant feeding guidelines in our country. So they recommend, as well as the World Health Organization, to wait until your baby is around 6 months old to start solids, and that they're showing the development signs that they are ready. So we're going to talk about the signs, but knowing what signs to look for gives you that good indication that your baby is ready to begin digesting food, and that they have enough, cognitive ability to let you know that they've had enough food. And that's really important alongside the nutritional aspect. That cognitive and development ability to sort of tell you and express what they need is equally important in developing that positive relationship with food and mealtime experience. So why we also say around 6 months is that's when after birth, some of the important nutrients like iron, which the stores have been built up in the final sort of months of pregnancy, by the time they get to around 6 months of age, that's when we start to see those stores depleting. And so they need to be topped up with complementary foods. So the signs to look for, the first one is that baby can sit up well. So you generally want to see them being able to support themselves in a seated position for the duration of the meal, which is around 10 to 15 minutes. And that doesn't mean expecting them to sit for that length of time on the floor unassisted, but it means that they generally will have that really good torso control and stability, and that they're not toppling all over the place and kind of, losing that head and neck control. The second one is that they can turn their head and show and express that they've had enough. So that means, like I said before, that your baby's able to express themselves when they're full. And that's really important to respect in order to develop trust, not just only with you, but with food and that positive relationship and experience with meals. Then you want to see reaching and grabbing. And this is a pretty common one you see around sort of 4 to 6 months of age. They start to reach and grab for all sorts of objects. But it's a really important one because that means that they're able to reach for foods and start to bring the food to their mouth in order to develop eventually the skill of feeding themselves. And then the last one is that the baby is showing interest in meal times. And so that is shown by them watching you eat, maybe mimicking you chewing without having any food themselves, and maybe leaning forward to indicate that they want some food as well. So ideally we want to have all 4 of these signs present, because that kind of shows that both physical and cognitive development is there and they are ready.
So if the guidelines are from 6 months, but your baby's showing all these signs before 6 months, what do you tend to recommend?
Yeah, so if they are, for me, I feel the most important signs are the first 2, that they can sit up well and that they can turn their head and express themselves, mainly because that means they're able to also control their head and neck, which can help prevent things like choking. It's really important that they're not slouching back in the high chair and that they are sitting up straight. So for me, it's those 2 predominantly, which most babies should start to show by 6 months. Some babies can show it sooner. It's when you see parents have the opposite, where they start seeing that their baby's really interested in mealtimes and maybe starting to reach and grab for objects, which generally happens around that age anyway, but they might not actually have that good head and neck control. I think for me, that's where I would wait to make sure you have all of those signs present, because you probably will see the reaching and grabbing first, and maybe some interest in mealtimes because they are interested in everything we do. And that continues through life. But yeah, making sure you've got all four.
Yeah, okay. Great to clarify. Okay, so let's say our Bubs has reached that age, they're showing, let's say, all four signs. How do you know what to start with? What's the right, how to introduce the right foods?
Yeah.
Big topic.
Yeah. So I like to recommend starting with literally real food. So unprocessed, whole foods, which are nutrient dense. And since that at the beginning, they're not going to be eating huge mouthfuls of food. Some babies, it might be a teaspoon. Some might be a little bit more than that, but it really varies from baby to baby. So we want to make sure that the food we are giving them is as nutrient dense as possible. And the best way to do that is to give them unprocessed whole foods before they've kind of had all of the nutrients taken out of them. So foods that I both recommend to my clients and also offered my own children are things like avocado. This could be in fingers or it could be mashed. That's a really great one to start with because it's really sort of simple, bland food as well. Root vegetables like sweet potato, pumpkin, carrot, when they're steamed, they're really soft and they make a really great finger food. Also really easy to use as a puree, and also something that you generally are probably eating yourself most days. You can kind of prepare for everyone in the one go. Eggs, one of my top foods for babies because they are beautifully nutrient dense. They contain protein, iron, choline, vitamin D, all really important nutrients for babies' development. And they're so easy to prepare and cook. Like whip up one egg, make a quick omelette, cut it up in finger strips, and there you go. Like so easy. And you can do it for yourself as well. So you're not eating baby scraps. Oily fish, such as sardines, that's really important for DHA, calcium, vitamin D. But again, a really easy food to get out of the tin, like sardines or salmon, and mix into a puree. Soft fruits like banana, steamed pears, peaches are also amazing. And then purees containing high quality animal proteins, so lamb, beef, chicken, with some veggies added in as well, or plant-based proteins like lentils or chickpeas. They would kind of be my main foods to start with. But really, like if it's a whole food and it's prepared in the most appropriate way, there really is no limit as to, aside from the allergenic foods, which need to be introduced a bit more mindfully, and foods like honey and cow's milk, which are kind of recommended to hold off until after 12 months. There's not really any other restrictions when it comes to which foods.
Would love to talk a little bit about the allergies, but first I just wanted to ask, because in everything you just mentioned, it was either sort of finger food, so I guess it's like the baby-led weaning, right, versus the purees. Like what sort of ratio do you always provide some puree alongside something for them to hold and try themselves? Like how do you manage it?
Yeah, so I think there are benefits to both, but what it comes down to is whether or not you're comfortable. And why I say that is because if you're going to be offering finger foods 100% of the time, but you're super anxious about choking, they're going to pick up on that anxiety, and our children are so connected to our emotions, and they're going to pick up on any anxieties that you might be having. And any moment they make a sound, you'll jump up. What's wrong? And we don't want that experience for them around mealtime. So I would say go with the method that you feel the most comfortable with. And if that's puree to start with, then go for it. And then maybe by around 9 months, which is what the research suggests, that from 9 months onwards is the optimal time to introduce finger food by, because that's what's been shown for optimal in terms of development, but also in terms of reducing food fussiness in toddlerhood as well. So don't feel like you have to offer finger food straight away if you're nervous, but you can really, I guess, do a combined approach, or you could do a puree only or a finger food only approach. It comes down to what you're most comfortable with. How was your experience the first time you tried feeding either puree or finger food? So I started with purees. And I was really anxious the first time because I wasn't informed. And so I started with purees. And then as we started to introduce finger foods, I actually got my husband to do a lot of that so that I could leave the room and not like be anxious around my daughter. And then I did a baby first aid course, and that helped me sort of understand the difference between choking and gagging and the anatomy and all of that. And I felt 100% better the second time around with my son. Like, he was eating finger foods like from the get-go in combination with purees, and family foods from the get-go as well. Like, we try to stick with one meal for all of the whole family and prepare it appropriately for him. But yeah, it was pretty much for me purees at the beginning. And then I think informing myself with that understanding definitely helped me feel less anxious. And I do recommend that to parents, that do that before you have your baby or in the first sort of 6 months, to really understand the differences, what to look for and what to do if choking does occur. Like, fingers crossed that's not the case for anybody, but just so you're equipped with the information and you have a plan if you're someone that is more anxiously inclined.
100% agree. Like, understanding the difference between a gag and a choke is really helpful. It didn't make me feel any better when the gagging was happening. I guess it did, because, you know, you knew it was a gag, but still those few seconds waiting for that food to come up. Yeah. So, yeah, good to know. I feel almost embarrassed to even say this, but with my first bubs, she's now about to turn 12, and there was a really big movement for baby-led weaning. Like, it was a really big, almost a push. And we had, with the maternal child health nurse, all these talks on baby-led weaning, and they're pretty much saying, just give your baby anything and they'll gag up whatever they can't eat. So, which I think was maybe that's my interpretation of what they said. So don't quote me. But I had this one really bad moment where I had been cooking Brussels sprouts. Like, when have I ever cooked Brussels sprouts? I don't know. Anyway, I steamed them and they're really soft, and I'd cut them into, I assume, halves or quarters, but one of the leaves came off and totally blocked her airway. And so she wasn't choking. It didn't go down her airway, but it was blocking her airway for ages. And I just, my in-laws were around at the moment, and I just remember, you know, when you berate yourself, like, and I've never forgotten that one moment, like, where, I'm sure every parent has a story like that though, like, or maybe not you.
Terrifying though, the thought of it. So yeah, that must have been really scary for you. I will say, if anyone is like hesitant on whatever type of food and how to prepare it, there's a really great free resource called Solid Starts. They have a food database, which has, you can search any food and it will come up with how to cook that food, how to prepare that food by age. And it's super handy. So if you ever are doubting yourself, can I give my baby Brussels sprouts? It'll say, like, tell you if it's not recommended for 6 months, or it'll say prepare it in this way, and it will give you that kind of confidence to know what to do.
Amazing resource. I wish I'd had that. I'll link it in the show notes as well for anyone listening. So thank you. Okay, awesome. So we've talked about when to start, how to know it's the right time. We've talked about introducing, I guess, the right foods. Let's touch on positive meal times. I know you've talked a little bit about it, but yeah, let's chat about positive meal times, because obviously it's really important. What are your tips around that?
Yeah, so my biggest one would be to ideally try to sit and eat with your child during meal times. I know life can be really challenging and busy, and often that's not always possible. So it doesn't have to be every meal every day, but it really is shown to be beneficial for their learning, because that's how they learn from us, is to mimic the actions and the behaviors that we exhibit, but also for their acceptance of food. So seeing you eat certain foods and enjoy certain foods is going to increase the chance of them also trying those foods, whether it be at that moment or sometime in the future. So yeah, you don't have to do it every single day. I personally try to do it every single day. Luckily enough, my husband works from home, so we try to sit down as a family at breakfast and dinner. But yeah, if you're someone that can't do that, then knowing at least one parent can do it a couple of times a week would be amazing for your child. So yeah, sitting together and then offering family meals kind of goes hand in hand with that. Having that same meal, same time philosophy is not only going to help from that side of things, but help save you a lot of headaches of preparing different foods for different children. If you just start from the get-go with one family meal and prepare it in the most appropriate way for each person, then yeah, eventually as those children get older, it's just one meal that you're all having.
And that's a game changer. Like I know there are sometimes, and look, everything works different at different times. And sometimes as parents, you get sick of eating the same foods as your kids and you want something a bit different. But that is an absolute game changer as a family of like with 3 kids is to all eat together and all eat the same food rather than feeding them and then once they're in bed cooking your own meal. It's just like, oh,
yeah,
too much effort.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you'll end up having to have like a snack later on once they're in bed because maybe you have eaten earlier. But it definitely, like in our family, in our family it works. And the amount of meals you could like prepare, like one of my favorite is like a roast chicken with just some like roasted root vegetables and some like a fresh zucchini salad. Like that is the easiest meal to prepare, but it's kind of suits everybody because the chicken's soft, the veggies can be soft or they can be mashed. And then the zucchini can be steamed or it can be given raw. Like there's so many options and it's still delicious for everyone. So yeah, that's like a great example of one that you could offer from literally from 6 months of age.
Love it. Any other quick examples?
Now, like slow cooked meats, if you have the time, like we would often in the early days do like a slow cooked lamb shoulder on a weekend, same with some veggies around it, and use that for multiple meals across the week as well. Like have that as our dinner on the weekend and then whip up some purees on the side from that food and then use the rest of it like on a pizza base, like lamb and other ingredients, or put it in a pasta another night. So that gives you like lots of different options that everyone can eat as well. And the next one that's really important as well is to let your child lead. And I guess this is where like the whole baby-led weaning movement comes from, is not just from the finger food aspect, but the opportunity to let your baby lead at meal times and taking on that understanding of what your role is at meal times, which is to offer a range of healthy foods and healthy food choices at specified times during the day. And it's their role to decide if they'll eat it and how much of that food they'll eat. So kind of having that perspective and not forcing your child to eat foods when they're not wanting to is going to help, again, with that positive mealtime experience and positive association with foods, as opposed to being pressured to try certain foods or to take one more bite to finish their bowl, which I'm sure we were all encouraged to do as children back in the day, to finish our plates. But yeah, you want them to have the same way that when they're born, we breastfeed on demand and let them lead from a breastfeeding perspective. It's the same with food. Like, why should we then take control of telling them how much they need to eat when their bodies are telling them, I'm not hungry? And that's really important for them to understand that connection, because later in life, we're all so busy and we all lose that mindfulness when eating, which can go on to lead into things like obesity, etc., because we're not really listening to our bodies, whether or not we're hungry. And then my last one would be to kind of goes along with the choking that we were talking about earlier, but trying to maintain that calm and positive attitude at mealtimes so that they aren't picking up on any of those anxieties that you might have during the mealtime or using food as a punishment.
And like I'm nodding my head now going, yep, totally agree. But I feel this needs to be another podcast episode. It's probably not quite my audience because my kids are a bit older now and it's so tricky because, you know, they're old. They can find the pantry themselves and they choose to stop eating the healthy stuff and then go straight for the snacks and the sweet stuff. So yeah, it's so it's good to start young while you can.
Yeah, and I know that's a whole minefield of another topic around like not just your role at mealtimes, but that conversation, how to have like the healthy conversation with kids around. I won't go into it because it's a whole nother topic, but yes.
If you're interested in that topic, send me a message on Instagram at Fitness Mama and let me know if you'd like one for older children, a discussion around older children. Amazing. Now, so we've just talked about starting solids, when to start introducing the right foods. We've talked about positive meal times. Is there anything, I'd love to ask like when to seek help. I'd like to ask that question, but before we get to that question, is there anything else you'd like to mention that we haven't?
Yeah, I think we haven't touched on how to prepare food safely. And I know that's something that is going to be, probably the number one question most parents have.
Let's do it.
When it comes to, obviously with purees, that's quite simple in terms of blending up into sort of a liquid-like consistency. But if you are someone wanting to offer finger foods, how do you know you've done that correctly? So the things you want to be doing is to firstly look at the shape. So roughly the length of your index finger in length and 1 to 2 fingers wide is a really good shape to make it easier for your little one to pick up and grasp the food and be able to bite from either end of their fist, because they might not necessarily have that pincer grasp developed yet. They'll still be using a whole hand. Texture, you want to cook foods until they're soft enough to squish between your thumb and forefinger. That's a good indication that without teeth, they can break the food apart easily using their gums. And the gums are quite tough. Like if you ever put your finger inside your baby's mouth, like that's quite hard. So you don't necessarily need teeth. It's just that kind of feeling of, can I put a little bit of pressure on this? And if it will squish, then that's a good test. Then supporting their grip with any slippery sort of finger foods like avocado or banana, you can look to coat them in things like hemp seeds or leaving like a peel on the banana as a handle. Is really great to help with the grip of foods. Round foods, and if you do a first aid course, they'll also talk about this, but any round foods you want to avoid for really young babies. And then babies who do have that pincer grasp, which kind of comes anytime from like 9-10 months, you want to make sure you've quartered them. So foods like cherry tomatoes, grapes, the main two that come to mind, quarter them as opposed to giving them in halves or wholes to reduce the danger there.
Until what age, sorry, with that grapes and the cherry tomatoes, what age would you say to quarter them till?
Up until I'd say like 4 years old. I still do that. My son's 2 and my daughter's 4, and I still do that. I actually saw a thing this week about a 2-year-old, almost 2-year-old, that choked in Perth on a grape that wasn't quartered. So that was very timely. And I was like, okay, I need to make sure I'm still doing this for my son. We'll make sure those around me are still doing this for my son. Yeah, it's really, really sad.
Yeah.
Then, not forgetting to serve iron-rich foods with every meal. So with a baby-led weaning approach, I think a lot of parents can feel nervous about giving strips of meat, but it is really important to still make sure you're offering foods that are rich in iron if you're going with that method. So again, you can look up the Solid Starts database for how, but depending on the type of meat, or that's where you might want to do like a combination approach with a puree that has meat in it and maybe some veggie sticks as a finger food if you're nervous in that way. And then I just wanted to touch on like resistive foods, because they are also really beneficial in terms of finger foods to offer. And if you are someone who's feeling nervous, you might want to opt for the resistive foods method, which are foods that don't easily break apart. So they don't really offer any nutritional value, but they do have the role of helping your baby learn to eat. And so you can sort of introduce them in the early stages when they're not quite ready for solids or they're only just ready. And it can help with developing their hand-eye coordination, helping them map the mouth to understand like how much food they can fit in their mouth and what's safe, helping them learn to chew by encouraging that tongue movement, and then strengthening jaw muscles and encouraging independent eating as well. So these are foods like celery sticks, mango pit, lamb chops with any of the loose meat or gristle removed. Watermelon rind is another great one. Once you've cleaned it, you can leave sort of like 1 to 2 centimeters of like watermelon on there, but let them predominantly chew on the rind. And then corn cob as like, I wouldn't offer that as an immediate first food, but as babies like had a few different foods and understands chewing, you can sort of shave the kernels in half and then give them the cob to gnaw on. Is another great one.
What are your thoughts of the rice husks that they sell in the shops that they say are fortified with iron?
Yeah. So I know a lot of health professionals recommend these because they are fortified with iron. I will say personally, I'm not a fan of them. The reason being is there's not a lot of other nutrients in there. So they're really not going to fill your baby up. Often they are sweetened with things like juice or other sweeteners, which isn't great in terms of added sugars overall. But also mainly, I don't know if you've ever had an iron supplement. I'm not going to mention certain brands, but an iron supplement in pregnancy or whenever, and had like digestive discomfort or constipation associated with that. I know that's a side effect for a lot of women. The same iron that's in those supplements is often what's used in the husks. So I do find, and in my own experience when I offered them to my children back in the day, that they had those sort of symptoms as well.
Yeah, right.
Not every baby, but personally, and in my experience with clients, like that's what I've seen. So I'd say unless you're struggling to offer iron-rich foods, which are going to be the most optimal because they're literally nature's way of presenting iron to the body, I wouldn't recommend them because they're not going to really, do much else.
I used to use them or offer them more as sort of entertainment. Like, for example, with my youngest, I had to go to my daughter's school assembly, and then that's something that's easily transportable that can keep her occupied and quiet for a little bit. But I hadn't thought about that consideration with the potential constipation. So,
Yeah, I mean, and I don't want to shame people who do offer them because I do understand, like, sometimes you do have to be out and about with 2 kids and you need to do something to quieten the younger one. So do what feels right for you. But if you are ever noticing like weird symptoms like that, maybe ask yourself, could it be that they're having a lot of these and that might be contributing to it? But that's not saying every child will have that symptom. Well, depending on the age of the baby, toys can be an option, like bringing a variety of different toys that they can play with. Otherwise, I don't know, yogurt pouch could be a good one. Actual rice crackers. There's some pretty good clean brands from the supermarkets these days. Sultanas, fruit, slices of cheese. Again, it all depends on the age of the baby.
Yeah.
Pancake pikelets, I used to love. This is one I always did. I'd whip up a batch of pikelets using whatever leftover veg we had from the day before, with just an egg and a little bit of flour. And that would sort of be like a good 2 to 3 days worth of like snacks that you could take on the go, and a pretty minimal in terms of mess as well.
I like that. Okay, let's start to wrap this up. But firstly, I do just want to ask, when would someone seek help? At what stage, if they're having difficulties with anything that we've talked about? And who do they seek help with as well?
So if your baby hasn't started to show the development signs of readiness sort of by 6.5, 7 months, I wouldn't be alarmed, but I would have a chat to your GP or maternal child health nurse or paediatrician just to get their feelings from that. If you're noticing, if you have introduced food and your little one's a little bit fussier than usual, or they're starting to get like a rash or any sort of gut discomfort, or you suspect something like a food allergy or a sensitivity, then that's when I would again go speak to the GP and then maybe consider a paediatric, like nutritionist, naturopath, dietitian in that regard. Or also from like helping with the sensitivity side of things, but also if it turns out to be a food allergy and they're having to remove a whole food group, making sure you've got that support to make up the gap in nutrients that they might have as a result of that. And then if your little one hasn't transitioned to lumpy and solid foods by 12 months, I would again be seeking probably pediatrician, GP. And if they're not able to feed themselves by sort of 12, 15 months, again, seeing their support. And then just generally, if you're not sure about what you're doing, or if you want that little bit of extra support and guidance and confidence, then I'd reach out to like a nutritionist, again, dietitian, naturopath, for just general support in terms of starting solids, because empowering yourself with tools and information is always going to make your experience a lot easier and beneficial for your child.
So I'll provide the links for your services, but are there any other, and you mentioned the Starting Solids Australia website or Starting Solids
They're
website.
actually Yeah, they're actually American, but I'll send you the link.
Okay. Now, final question, how can people come and find you, Kelly, and how can you help them?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at feeding.the.bump. And yeah, so I offer, I guess, support for women through the whole preconception pregnancy journey, postpartum, or for your baby in those first sort of important years of life. So if you have any questions or need support, just reach out to me on Instagram and I'd be happy to help.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the chat today. I wish we had chatted when my baby was 6 months old. Thank you so much. Appreciate you joining us today.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
And before I sign off, remember my team and I will be putting together the show notes for this episode with all the links, including how to connect with Kelly at fitnessmama.com/podcast. That's it, ladies. Have a fabulous day, and I look forward to you joining me next week for another episode of the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. Thanks for listening to the Fitness Mama podcast, brought to you by the Fitness Mama freebies found at www.fitnessmama.com/free. So please take a few seconds to leave a review, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and be sure to take a screenshot of this podcast, upload it to your social media, and tag me at Fitness Mama so I can give you a shout out too. Until next time, remember, an active pregnancy, confident childbirth, and strong postnatal recovery is something that you deserve. Remember our disclaimer, materials and contents in this podcast are intended as general information only and shouldn't substitute any medical advice, diagnosis or treatment. I'll see you soon.